Welcome to Deep Dive Lab, where we break down and dissect cutting-edge scientific research, from advanced biomedical technologies to breakthroughs in AI, materials science, chemistry, and physics, all told as compelling, easy-to-follow stories. I am your host for today's Deep Dives.
And I am the expert joining you to unpack the science.
So, to start us off, I want you to imagine, just for a second, that iconic bullet time scene from The Matrix. You know the one I mean, right?
Absolutely, where Neo bends backward and the camera just spins around him.
Yeah, exactly. The bullet is just hanging there, frozen in midair. It is an absolute masterpiece of visual effects. But today, we're going to try and do that exact same trick, but not with a bullet.
With an electron.
Which, I mean, that is an entirely different universe of speed. A bullet flying through the air is, practically moving in reverse compared to an electron orbiting a nucleus.
Right. It is a snail's pace, really, because if you actually want to freeze an electron in motion to photograph it, to see what it's actually doing in real time, a normal camera flash is completely useless.
Oh, yeah. Completely. You need a flash of light that lasts for an attosecond. And for anyone trying to wrap their head around that, an attosecond is 1/quintillionth of a second. That is 10 to the negative 18th power.
Right, and to put that into a physical perspective, there are about as many attoseconds in a single second as there have been seconds since the birth of the entire universe.
Wow.
Yeah, it is the absolute ultimate limit of slow motion.
And capturing that microscopic motion, it isn't just a fun party trick. It is the holy grail of modern physics and chemistry.
Exactly, because if you can see electrons move, you can watch chemical bonds break and form in real time.
Right. And today's deep dive is taking us right to the bleeding edge of that frontier.
Mm.
We are looking at a groundbreaking paper recently published in the journal Nature by Dr. Zhejian Jiang and a team of researchers from the East China Normal University.
Yes, and we are also pulling from a really insightful news and views analysis of this work by Jan Marcus Dahlström from Lund University.
So our mission today, really, is to uncover how these scientists essentially hacked the laws of physics. They figured out how to generate the extreme light power needed for these attosecond flashes, but without the catastrophic destructive force that usually comes with it.
Because generating an attosecond pulse, it isn't just a matter of building a faster shutter. It requires a tremendous amount of energy to initiate the process.
Right, you have to physically rip an electron away from an atom.
Yeah, and traditionally, the way we've delivered that energy has been, well, highly problematic for the samples we actually want to study.
And that is the core scientific mystery we're dealing with today. To get that incredibly brief attosecond flash, the first step is to forcefully evict an electron from its comfortable home inside an atom.
Which is not easy.
No, not at all. The traditional way to do that is to blast the atom with a conventional classical laser, a massive one. You need raw, blinding intensity. But here's the problem. When you hit delicate atoms, or complex molecules, with that much brute force power, you cause catastrophic radiation damage. You essentially vaporize your target.
Yeah, you are fundamentally destroying the very thing you were trying to observe, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of the experiment.
Exactly. It's like trying to gently open a peanut by shooting it with a bazooka.
That is actually a perfect way to put it.
So naturally, my immediate reaction when reading about this roadblock was, wait, aren't we just stuck? If we need the massive laser to get the process started, but the massive laser vaporizes the target, isn't that a hard limit for science?
It definitely seems like one, yeah.
Can't we just turn the laser down and use a gentler beam?
Well, the problem with turning the laser down is that you lose the specific physical mechanism that makes the attosecond flash possible in the first place.
Okay, so a gentle laser just fundamentally doesn't work.
Right. To understand why a gentler classical laser won't work, we have to look at how the scientists are actually pulling that electron away. It's a process called tunneling ionization.
Tunneling ionization. Okay. So normally, when an atom gets ionized, meaning it loses an electron, it happens because the electron absorbs a photon of light.
Right, exactly. The photon gives the electron a little bump of energy.
And if it's enough energy, the electron overcomes the atom's gravitational-like pull and flies away. Single photon ionization.
That is the standard everyday process, yes. But tunneling ionization is an entirely different beast. It is what physicists call a strong field phenomenon.
Strong field, okay.
Yeah. When you use an incredibly intense laser, The electromagnetic field of the laser is so overwhelmingly powerful that it actually physically distorts the electromagnetic field of the atom itself.
So it bends the walls of the atom.
Exactly. It warps the potential energy barrier that keeps the electron trapped.
Wow.
Normally, the electron doesn't have nearly enough energy to climb over that wall, but because the intense laser field has distorted the wall, making it incredibly thin and low on one side, the electron can do something bizarre.
It doesn't climb over.
No, it just sneaks out right through the wall. It tunnels through a path that classical physics says is completely forbidden.
That is so wild. It's like trying to get a heavy bowling ball over a massive, tall brick wall. Classical physics says you need to throw it with enough brute force to clear the top. That's the giant laser approach.
Right, the bazooka approach.
Yeah, but the quantum tunneling approach is like having an earthquake violently shake the ground for a split second, causing a temporary crack to form at the bottom of the wall so the ball can just roll right through to the other side.
I love that. That is a fantastic way to visualize it. And once it rolls through that crack, the laser field grabs the electron, accelerates it, and then slams it back into the atom.
And that collision is what releases the high energy at a second flash of light.
You got it. But the tunneling, the cracking of the wall, that is step one. And the probability of that crack forming scales exponentially with the intensity of the laser light. It is a highly nonlinear optical effect.
Which brings us right back to our original problem. To get the intensity high enough to cause that earthquake and crack the wall, you need quadrillions of photons. You need the destructive heat and power.
Exactly.
So how do you get the intense electromagnetic field needed to bend those atomic walls without melting the neighborhood?
Well, this is where Dr. Jiang and his colleagues introduce what I can only describe as a quantum cheat code.
Ooh, a cheat code. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, they realized that tweaking classical lasers was a dead end. So they abandoned the classical approach entirely. Instead, they used a quantum light source known as a bright squeezed vacuum, or BSV.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there.
Right.
Because I'm stuck on this idea of a bright squeezed vacuum.
It is a bit of a mouthful.
First of all, the name is brilliantly paradoxical, but when I read this in the paper, my brain sort of short-circuited. By definition, a vacuum is empty. It's nothingness.
Right?
And the paper states that the mathematically average electric field of this BSV pulse is perfectly zero.
Yes, that is correct.
So if the average energy is zero, doesn't conservation of energy mean we can't possibly do the physical work required to rip an electron away? Where is the energy actually coming from to crack the wall?
It sounds impossible until you dive into the weirdness of quantum mechanics. In classical physics, a vacuum is just empty space. Zero energy, zero activity.
It's a void.
Exactly. But in quantum mechanics, a vacuum state is never truly empty. It is a boiling soup of temporary energy, with particles constantly popping in and out of existence.
That is deeply unsettling, but very cool.
Right. A bright squeezed vacuum is a very specific engineered state of this light. And you're right, the average electric field is mathematically zero.
So if I set up a traditional light meter in the room, it's going to read zero.
It would read zero because over time, the positive swings and the negative swings cancel each other out perfectly. But the secret isn't in the average, it's in the variance. This state exhibits massive quantum fluctuations.
Ah, okay. So it's not a steady, calm zero. It's violently swinging back and forth, hitting extreme highs and extreme lows. But if you average it all out over a second, you get zero.
Precisely. Think of a conventional classical laser like a smooth, steady wave of water coming out of a garden hose. It's predictable, continuous, and the energy is evenly distributed over time.
Right, a constant stream.
A bright squeezed vacuum is fundamentally different. Because of those wild quantum fluctuations, the photons don't arrive in a steady stream. They arrive in wildly unpredictable, massive clumps.
Okay, so if the classical laser is a steady stream from a hose, the BSV is like throwing buckets of water at completely random intervals. Sometimes you get absolutely nothing, just dry air.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get a massive instantaneous deluge of water all at once.
Exactly. And it is during those momentary, massive deluges, those extreme quantum fluctuations, that the local intensity spikes incredibly high.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, for a fraction of a second, the intensity is high enough to bend the atomic wall and trigger that tunneling ionization, even though the overall average energy of the pulse is incredibly low.
So you are getting the peak destructive intensity of a sledgehammer, but the total average energy delivery of a gentle tap.
That is exactly it.
Wait, if the field is mathematically zero on average, and any traditional instrument is just going to read zero, How do you actually prove a spike happened?
That is the tricky part.
Yeah, how did Dr. Zhang's team measure an experiment where the defining feature is microscopic, instantaneous chaos?
That requires an incredibly elegant experimental setup. They couldn't just fire this fluctuating light at a solid block of metal or a complex molecule. There's way too much noise.
You need a controlled environment.
Exactly. They needed the cleanest possible environment. So they created a dilute gas of isolated sodium atoms in a vacuum chamber and fired their ultrafast 150 femtosecond BSV pulses into it.
And they specifically chose sodium for a reason, right?
Uh-huh.
They didn't just grab table salt.
No. Sodium was carefully selected because of its atomic structure. It has a single valence electron in its outermost shell that is relatively loosely bound compared to the tight grip of something like a noble gas.
So it has a low ionization potential.
Yes. That makes it the perfect, highly sensitive testing ground to see if these momentary quantum spikes could actually trigger the tunneling effect without other atoms interfering or shielding the results.
But that still leaves the measurement problem. You fire the strange clumpy light at the sodium, an electron pops off. How do you measure how hard the light pushed it?
Well, the researchers used a brilliant measurement technique called angular streaking.
Angular streaking, okay.
To do this, they polarized their light elliptically. So imagine the electric field of the light isn't just waving up and down, it's rotating like the sweeping hand of a radar screen.
So the field is spinning in a circle as it moves forward.
Exactly. As the electron tunnels out of the sodium atom and escapes, it immediately gets caught in that rotating electric field. The light literally sweeps it up and flings it outward.
Like a slingshot.
Yeah, and the final momentum of that escaping electron, meaning how fast it's going, and the exact angle it flies off at when it hits the detector, is directly proportional to the vector potential of the light at the exact moment the electron escaped.
We should probably define vector potential here, because that's a pretty heavy physics term.
Good idea.
We can think of vector potential as the underlying tension or the pull of the electromagnetic field at that exact microscopic location in fraction of a second.
That's a great way to describe it. It's the invisible current pulling on the particle. By measuring the final angle and speed of the electron, they can trace backwards to calculate exactly how strong that invisible current was at the moment of birth.
Wow, so the electron itself acts as the speedometer and the directional compass for the light. By seeing how hard the electron gets thrown across the room, they know exactly how strong the microscopic fluctuation of the light was, even if the average field is zero.
Exactly. The electron's momentum provides an indelible fingerprint of the light's true peak intensity.
That is so clever.
It really is. And by comparing the momentum of electrons thrown by regular classical lasers versus electrons thrown by the bright squeezed vacuum, they were able to quantify the actual effective intensity of their quantum cheat code.
And this is where the numbers completely blew my mind. When they ran the angular streaking data, the results were just staggering.
Oh, absolutely.
They found that a BSV pulse with an average energy of just 300 nanojoules produced the exact same peak electron momentum, meaning it hit the sodium atom just as hard and caused the same amount of tunneling as a classical coherent laser pulse packing 7.1 microjoules of energy.
Yes. The scale of that difference is the entire crux of the discovery.
That is a more than 20-fold boost in the nonlinear effect. They achieved the exact same tunneling power using a tiny fraction of the raw overall energy.
Right.
They caused the earthquake to crack the wall without having to detonate a bomb in the neighborhood.
You are extracting a high-energy result using a low-energy input simply by exploiting the structural chaos, the quantum statistics of the light itself.
It feels like getting something for nothing.
Well, in experimental physics, a single impressive ratio isn't enough to claim you've rewritten the rules. They had to prove rigorously that this 20-fold boost was genuinely due to the quantum nature of the light interacting with the atom, and not just a calibration error or a fluke in the detector.
Right. You're going to claim you found a physics cheat code. You need to show the raw security footage. So how did they prove the mechanics?
They looked at the statistical distribution of the emitted electrons. When you ionize a gas with a classical laser, the photons arrive randomly but independently of one another. This results in an electron emission pattern known as a Poisson distribution.
And a Poisson distribution is essentially a predictable baseline for random independent events, right? It's like measuring raindrops hitting a tin roof.
Yes, perfect analogy.
They are random, but they don't influence each other, so over time, they form a very predictable statistical curve. It looks exactly the way classical independent physics says it should look.
Exactly. The classical laser gives you the raindrop pattern, but when they use the bright squeezed vacuum light, the pattern of the electrons completely changed. The emitted electrons exhibited a wildly non-Poissonian distribution.
So the raindrops were clumping.
Yes. When they mapped the spectrum of the electron's kinetic energy, the graph showed a highly extended, broadened tail. It wasn't that neat, predictable curve anymore. It was stretched out, indicating that a significant number of electrons were being emitted at much higher energies than classical physics would ever allow.
And the reason for that stretched out tail is the most mind-bending part of the whole paper.
Oh, definitely.
The electrons weren't just getting hit by the light. They were literally inheriting the statistical properties of the light.
Yes. The electrons became quantumly entangled with the light field.
Wow.
In standard semi-classical models of physics, which treat the laser light as a classical predictable wave and the atom as a quantum object, this entanglement doesn't happen. The light just acts as a hammer.
Right, just brute force.
But here, the massive clumpy quantum fluctuations of the BSV light were perfectly imprinted onto the escaping electrons. To fully explain this, the researchers had to develop an entirely new theoretical framework.
The paper calls this the quantum Amosov-Delone-Krenov theory, or QADK.
Right, so the traditional ADK theory has been the gold standard for describing strong field ionization for decades. But as I mentioned, it's semi-classical. It ignores the quantum nature of the light.
Oh, gosh.
The new QADK theory explicitly accounts for that light-electron entanglement. It mathematically proves that the quantum statistical nature of the bright squeezed vacuum, all those wild, boiling fluctuations, redistributes the probability of ionization, creating that broadened energy tail. The physical experiment and their new mathematical theory matched perfectly.
But they didn't just observe this phenomenon and write down the math. They figured out how to drive the car. They found a steering wheel.
They found a control knob, which is perhaps the most practical and exciting breakthrough in the entire study.
Yeah, tell us about that.
They proved they could actively control this effective intensity by tuning a very specific parameter called the second-order correlation function.
In the charts, they refer to it as G2. And from what I understand, this G2 parameter essentially measures the degree of photon bunching. It measures how clumpy the light is.
Exactly.
But how do you change the clumpiness of the light without just pumping more energy into the system?
It comes down to how the light is generated. They create the BSV by pumping a laser into a specialized nonlinear crystal. By carefully adjusting the power of the pump laser entering the crystal and then applying optical attenuation to the output, they could change how intensely the photons were bunched together while keeping the total average pulse energy completely flat.
Okay, it's like rearranging the cars on a highway.
How so?
Well, you aren't adding more cars to the road, so the total mass and energy is the same. But instead of letting them drive smoothly spaced apart, you are forcing them into massive, localized traffic jams at specific spots to create a huge spike in impact.
That is a brilliant analogy, yes. The total number of cars remains identical, but the localized density at the site of the crash is manipulated.
That makes total sense.
And they found a strict linear scaling law. As they increased the G2 correlation as they made the traffic jams worse, the effective intensity of the ionization scaled up linearly. They built a volume knob for the nonlinear effect that operates completely independently from the main power dial.
So if you're listening to this and wondering why we care so much about bullying dilute sodium atoms with vacuum fluctuations, the endgame here is actually revolutionary for almost every field of applied science.
It really is, because if we zoom out, this changes the fundamental limits of what human beings can observe.
We circle back to where we started, attosecond pulses.
Yes.
Tunneling ionization is the mandatory first step in generating the light pulses we need to probe the absolute most fundamental dynamics of matter.
Because everything around us, biology, chemistry, material science, is dictated by how electrons move and interact. If you want to understand how a complex chemical reaction actually happens, you have to watch the electrons make their moves.
But historically, our massive bottleneck has been the material damage threshold. If we wanted to look at a complex, fragile protein molecule, we needed a massive classical laser to generate the attosecond pulse to take the picture.
Right.
But that giant laser would literally blow the fragile protein apart before we could study it.
Exactly. And by achieving these extreme nonlinear tunneling effects with 20 times less average energy, Dr. Zhang's team has completely bypassed that bottleneck.
To put that in the real world, imagine pharmaceutical development. Right now, a lot of drug design involves indirect observation and supercomputer guessing about how a drug molecule interacts with a disease protein.
Yes, lots of simulation.
But with this technology, we could eventually use attosecond flashes, driven by quantum light, to film the exact real-time moment the chemical bonds break and form in that protein, all without destroying the drug sample with radiation in the process.
Or consider the transition to clean energy. We could watch, in real time, exactly how electrons move through the crystalline structures of next-generation solar panels.
Oh, wow.
That allows engineers to design new synthetic materials that are infinitely more efficient at capturing sunlight and transferring power because they can finally see the traffic jams at the atomic level.
So if we step back, we've essentially traded a brute force sledgehammer for a quantum lockpick. We are moving attosecond technology from this crude, semi-classical era where we just hit things with massive amounts of power and hoped for the best into a true, fully controllable quantum realm.
Yeah, where we are using the underlying chaos of the universe as a precision scalpel.
It's a fundamental paradigm shift in how we control matter at the smallest possible scales.
It really is. And reflecting on the historical context of all this, there is a profound philosophical shift happening here, too.
How do you mean?
Well, for over a century since the dawn of modern physics, we have largely treated light as a smooth, classical wave when it interacts with matter on a large scale. We viewed quantum fluctuations, the boiling vacuum, as background noise, a nuisance we had to filter out.
But now, we aren't just observing the noise of quantum mechanics, we aren't filtering it out. We are actively weaponizing that noise to perform the heavy lifting of science. We're using the static to take the picture.
Exactly. It completely flips your perspective on what empty or noisy really means in physics.
It really does. And that leaves us with a final mind-bending question to chew on as we wrap up today's investigation. If scientists can engineer the literal nothingness of a vacuum state, leveraging its hidden microscopic fluctuations to do the heavy lifting of a high-powered laser, what other seemingly empty or chaotic parts of our universe are just waiting for us to figure out their statistics?
That is a fascinating thought.
Right. The freezing space between the stars, the empty voids deep inside our own selves. What else is secretly boiling with unseen energy, just waiting for the right quantum cheat code to unlock it? Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Deep Dive Lab. If you enjoyed uncovering the mysteries of the quantum realm with us today, be sure to follow and subscribe for more fascinating science stories. We will see you on the next Deep Dive.